Niman Hao. Welcome. Welcome to the course on energy, the environment, and human health. It's a pleasure for me to be back in China, Beijing, and your university. As my good friend, Professor Huang, has said, this is my 13th visit to China. 11 times, I believe, I've been to Beijing, maybe 7, 8 times to this campus. Unfortunately, despite all the time I've spent in China, I have not been able to master the language. So I am going to speak in English, and I'm going to speak slowly, carefully, but if you don't understand what I say, if I use terms that you're not familiar with, jargon is the word that would refer to unfamiliar terms, please don't hesitate to raise your hand and to ask for clarification. If you don't understand what I've said, it's very likely that most of the people in the class didn't understand what I said. So you'll be doing not only yourself a favor by asking me to clarify the comment, but you'll be doing probably everyone else in the room a favor by asking. If you have a question, don't hesitate to raise your hand at any time and ask the question. This is going to be a good opportunity for you to listen to English, become more comfortable with hearing English. But it could also be an opportunity for you to practice your English, to ask your questions in English. If you're too shy, if you prefer asking the question in Chinese, fine. We'll have somebody translate the question. Also, if you have something to contribute, if you want, from your experience, from your research, from your reading, from your experience in the village where you've come from, you may have something of value to contribute. And in this way, you could learn more about my experiences, and I can learn about your experiences. The way the class is going to be structured is typically I'm going to start with about a 15-minute review of what I had the previous day's lectures. And I'll emphasize what I consider to be the most important points from the previous day. Then I'll lecture for about an hour. We'll take a 10 or 15-minute break. Then I'll lecture for another hour. And then the last perhaps half an hour be open for questions. And the questions don't have to be restricted to the material that we've covered. I'm open to any questions, anything that you'd like to talk about. Geology, the United States, politics, economics, anything. Though that's half hour will not be recorded. So we can talk about whatever we want. Again, in this way, you can learn more about the United States, and I can learn more about China. So I hope it will be mutually beneficial. What I'd like to do this first hour, though, is to go over just a very, very rapid overview of what I'm going to be talking about for the next 9 lectures. Today, we'll review the course. After the break, I'm going to talk about the energy mix. That is, the different proportion of the energy resources that are used in China, in the United States, that's being used now, that will be used in the future. we'll see how this changes, how the amounts of the proportion of coal, of oil, of gas, of nuclear changes with time and with location. Then after that, today, I'll talk about the introduction to coal. What is coal? How did it form? And then tomorrow, we'll talk about how much coal there is, how long will it last, and we'll discuss coal mining, utilization, composition. Much of my lectures will be based on experience in the United States, but I have, as I've already mentioned, spent a fair amount of time in China, so I'll be bringing in some examples for China, but you may have additional information that you can share with us. I'll be talking about coal and the environment. Uncontrolled coal fire is a very, very important issue to China. We'll talk about, and this is probably two lectures, 2 hours, discussing the health impacts of coal. And this is the primary research that I've initiated in China. We'll talk a little bit about coal bed methane and shale gas, very important issues to the United States, to China, to many other countries. This is completely changing the energy outlook for certainly the United States and perhaps for the world. But again, these are not areas where I've done a lot of research, and there may be people here in the room who know more about these subjects than I do, and I certainly welcome your input, your comments. We'll talk about the health impacts of oil and gas, health impacts of trace elements, and here, obviously, we're now transitioning from the discussion of coal to the subject that we call medical geology, the impacts of geologic materials like coal and oil, gas, minerals, dust, water, soil, and their impact on human health. We'll talk, I'll give a number of lectures on health impacts of coal in China, impacts of dust, soil, and a number of other issues that I think are very important to China, very relevant to your country. And there's going to be some overlap as we look at these issues from slightly different perspectives. I'll have to repeat some of the material that I've covered. We'll look at the health benefits of rocks and minerals. And one of the most extraordinary benefits we discovered here in China. We all agree that burning coal can be very dangerous. It can cause health problems if you don't use the right coal, if you don't use it in the right way. But yet, I'll show you an example from China where burning coal in the home, which is the most dangerous way of using coal, has actually prevented thousands and thousands of very serious health problems. And it's an extraordinary example. And we'll talk about that when I talk about benefits. We'll look at the future of medical geology, a lecture on forensic geology, that how we use geologic equipment, analysis, information, database to solve mysteries, sometimes criminal mysteries, but we'll look at more of economic mysteries. Much of that discussion will come back to coal. And we'll finally have a class exercise where we'll pose a couple of questions, and based on my lectures, on your own experience, we'd like you to explain how you would go about addressing these problems, these issues that we talk about. And if we have time, I may talk about a subject that's far removed from any of this, but may be of interest, the moon rocks. The field trip, as Professor Huang said, is on the 26th, which is, what day is it? Friday, okay. So that gives you an idea of the topics that we're going to be covering. But what I'd like to do now is illustrate these issues. And in all of my lectures, every one of my lectures, I use a lot of pictures, of images, because I believe, and I think we've found that you're able to memorize, to remember an image much easier than you can a list of numbers or a formula. So there'll be very, very few formulas, very few tables. And when I have a table, it's not the numbers that I'm emphasizing. It's the significance of the numbers. What do they signify? What's the importance of the numbers? So you're going to see a lot of pictures, and I'll be describing what the significance of these pictures are, as we'll see in a moment. After the break, I'm going to talk about energy mix. But let me mention this. I'm a typical North American, and I function by the clock. So we will start the lectures exactly at 3 o'clock every afternoon. When I say we're going to take a 10-minute break or 15-minute break, I will start exactly at the end of the 10 minutes or 15 minutes. I'll give you the time, and we will start exactly at the time I say. This is the way I function, and I'm sorry, but you'll have to work with me. After our break today, I'm going to be talking about the energy mix, the different forms of energy that are used. In this example, we're looking at production, and in this example, from China, that's the U.S., and China, this is energy consumption. And we'll see that sometimes, or very often, they're quite different. And I'll explain why they're different, what the significance of the difference are, not only between the countries, but we'll look at differences in production and consumption. We'll look at differences in some cases within the country. And most importantly, we're going to look at differences with time, how the energy mix changes over time, and what can we expect in the future. And we'll look at not only the larger picture, all of the energy that's produced or consumed, but put some emphasis on electricity. The very, very significant part of the energy picture is the use of these energy resources to produce electricity. When I talk about coal, the theme running through much of my discussion is why some people feel that coal is essential. They refer to coal as being king coal. I'll explain why they think it's fascinating. And yet, there are many, many people that consider coal to be dirty, to be deadly, to be boring. They're talking about the same material. Why are there such different opinions, different attitudes towards coal? Who is right? Who is wrong? We're going to discuss that aspect of coal. We're going to be talking about describing what is coal, how and when did it form, where does it occur, what's it made of, why is it important? And again, the most important question that we'll be asking is, can we live with it? Can we live without it? And I am not going to give you the answers to these questions, because the answer to this question is often very personal. It depends on your own experience. It depends on your own attitudes. It depends on your politics. But what I'm trying to do is give you the information that you need to make an intelligent decision with regard to that question. We'll see why coal was referred to as King Coal in the United States, why it was so important. And again, the changing energy mix over time. Where was it years ago? Where is it heading? What can we expect for the near future? Coal has been extremely important throughout much of history, and a lot of people don't appreciate the importance that coal has had to our civilization. It fueled the Industrial Revolution. In the mid-1800s, the steam engine was invented. And what that did is it completely changed our civilization. The entire world was impacted by the steam engine, which was dependent on coal. What happened when with the Industrial Revolution is that people no longer worked in their own homes, working by hand, producing individual products. They now were able to come together in factories and mass produce materials. Little villages disappeared as people moved into cities to these factories where the materials, the personnel were available to start producing all these products that people were now demanding and buying. So it changed our lifestyle throughout the world. And a lot of people don't realize this. World War II could never have occurred without coal. Germany had no, and Italy had no oil and gas. They were unable to operate their tanks, their planes, their trucks, their cars, because they had no oil and gas resources. So what they did was they developed a method for liquefying and gasifying coal. Germany had abundant coal resources. And once they were able to convert that coal into liquids, then they were able to generate the fuel for their tanks and their planes and their boats, and were able to conduct World War II. I don't know this, maybe someone here can help, but I suspect that one of the reasons Japan invaded China was to get the coal resources. Japan has no natural fuels, no oil, no gas, very little coal. So for Japan to conduct a war effort, they needed to get fuel. And certainly China has abundant coal resources. And I suspect that that's one of the incentives that Japan had for invading China. More recently, South Africa had this policy where they suppressed the black population. 20% white population was dominant. And despite the world condemning this, they were able to function for 10 years, 20 years in this way because they had coal and they were able to liquefy the coal. They were not able to import oil and gas. The world had an embargo against sending them oil and gas. So the South Africans improved the German technology and converted their coal into the oil and gas that allowed them to function until Mandela and the political changes that occurred about 20 years ago. If you look at American cities, and maybe cities in Europe, maybe in China, similar, but almost all of the older American cities, those that have been around for 200 years, the wealthier communities where the rich people live is always to the north and to the west, and the poorer people live to the south and the east. And why is this? Why, no matter where you go, north, south, east, west, central part of the United States, that distribution is always the same. Why? Well, there are two reasons for it. One is coal, and the other one is the climate, the wind patterns. The wind blows generally from the west to the east across the United States. When the Industrial Revolution occurred, the factories, where did the factories start? Where were they built? In the middle of the cities. That's where the power plants were. That's where the factories that were burning the coal. Well, all that smoke and that dust that were coming out of the power plant, where did that go? That was blown from the center of the city to the east, and in many cases to the southeast. Well, the rich people, they didn't want to live with that dust and smoke and the smell, so they built their fancy communities to the west, away from the smoke. Poor people, they didn't have a choice, so they were, the poorer homes were built in the south and the west in the direction where the pollution was blowing.